Let me ask you something, quietly, woman to man. Have you ever sat next to someone, phone in your hand, staring at the screen, waiting and waiting, wondering why she suddenly went cold? No explanation, no argument, just silence. And the strange part? Instead of losing interest, you felt more pulled in, more restless, more focused on her than ever before. Now here's the uncomfortable question no one asks you. Why did that work on you? Because if you're honest, it didn't feel like confidence. It didn't feel like control. It felt like your self-esteem was slowly leaking out while you tried to play it cool. And yet, everywhere online, you hear the same advice. Ignore her. Pull back. Disappear and she'll chase. So today, we're not going to sugarcoat this. We're going to talk about the dark psychology behind ignoring a woman, why it sometimes works, why it often backfires, and what it really says about the man using it. Let me be very clear from the start. This is not about manipulation. This is not about playing games, and it's definitely not about turning yourself into someone you're not. This is about understanding human psychology, because once you understand it, you stop being controlled by it. Here's the first truth most men don't want to hear. Ignoring doesn't create attraction by itself. It creates uncertainty, and the human brain hates uncertainty. Psychological research shows that when people experience unpredictable rewards, attention sometimes, silence other times, the brain releases more dopamine than when rewards are consistent. This is the same mechanism behind addiction, gambling, and obsessive thinking. Not love, not desire, obsession. So when a man suddenly withdraws attention, the woman's brain doesn't think, wow, he's high value. It thinks, something changed, why? And the brain starts filling in the gaps. But here's where men get it wrong. They think the silence itself is power. It's not. The power comes from who can walk away without anxiety. Ask yourself this honestly. Are you ignoring her because you're grounded and busy with your life, or because you're hoping she notices your absence and validates you? Because psychologically, those two things land very differently. Men with low self-esteem often overgive attention early. They text too fast. They explain too much. They seek reassurance without realizing it. So when they hear ignore her, it feels like a weapon. Finally, something that makes them feel in control. But control built on fear is fragile. And here's the controversial part most people won't tell you. Ignoring only works on women who are already emotionally invested or emotionally insecure themselves. If a woman is emotionally healthy, silence doesn't make her chase. It makes her detach. She doesn't ask, how do I get him back? She asks, why would I want someone who disappears? So if ignoring has ever worked for you, the real question is, what kind of emotional dynamic were you in to begin with? This video isn't here to shame you, but it is here to wake you up. Because the goal is not to make a woman anxious. The goal is to become a man whose presence feels calm, grounded, and optional, not desperate. And throughout this video, we're going to break down why silence triggers emotional loops, why some men mistake distance for strength, and why real attraction has nothing to do with disappearing. So stay with me, because by the end of this, you won't need to ignore anyone to feel powerful again. And that's where things get interesting. Let me ask you something uncomfortable again. When you give a woman attention, texts, calls, reassurance, do you secretly hope she feels more attracted to you because of it? And when you stop giving that attention, do you feel a strange sense of relief, almost like you've finally taken your power back? That feeling right there is the key to understanding why ignoring gets misunderstood. Here's the psychological truth most men never hear clearly. The human brain assigns value to what feels scarce, not because it's better, not because it's healthier, but because the brain is wired to prioritize what it might lose. This is basic psychology. Studies on attention and reward show that when something is consistently available, the brain stops actively tracking it. But when access becomes uncertain, when attention comes and goes, the brain stays alert. Focus increases. Emotional energy spikes. So when attention is suddenly withdrawn, the brain asks, did I do something wrong? Did something change? Why does this feel unfinished? That question loop creates emotional tension. Now listen carefully. This is where men get trapped. They assume that silence equals strength, but silence only feels powerful if the person using it doesn't need an outcome. Here's the brutal honesty. If you are ignoring her, hoping she reacts, you are not powerful. You are anxious, just quietly. And women feel that. Psychologically, attention feels like value because attention signals investment. When you give attention freely, it says, I'm here, I'm present, I'm not afraid of connection. That can be attractive when it comes from confidence. But when attention is excessive, rushed, or emotionally loaded, it signals something else. I need this interaction to feel okay. That's when attention loses its value. So some men swing to the opposite extreme. They pull back completely, they go cold, they disappear. And yes, sometimes the woman suddenly becomes more interested. But here's why that happens, and it's not flattering. The silence creates a break in expectation. Her brain had a pattern: attention, presence, consistency. Now the pattern is broken. The brain doesn't like unresolved patterns, so it tries to restore balance by thinking more about you. Not because you became more attractive, but because the interaction became incomplete. This is the same psychological mechanism behind cliffhangers, unfinished conversations, and unanswered messages. The brain seeks closure, so ignoring works in the short term only when it creates uncertainty, not admiration. And uncertainty is not desire, it's tension. Here's the part men don't reflect on enough. If your presence only feels valuable when it's removed, what does that say about how you show up when you're there? Strong men don't use silence as a tool. They use selective presence. They don't over-explain. They don't chase reactions. They don't vanish to provoke emotion. They simply don't overinvest where it's not reciprocated. And that difference matters, because psychologically, the woman isn't responding to the ignoring. She's responding to the shift in dynamic. The real attraction trigger is not silence. It's the sense that you are emotionally stable, whether she engages or not. That's why two men can do the same thing, pull back, and get opposite results. One looks calm, grounded, and self-directed. The other looks passive-aggressive, insecure, or manipulative. Same action, different emotional energy. So before you ever think ignoring works, ask yourself this instead. Am I withdrawing because I respect myself, or because I want control over how she feels? Because women don't fall for silence. They respond to emotional certainty. And in the next section, we're going to go deeper into the anxiety loop this creates and why the brain turns missing information into obsession. Let me paint a familiar picture. Nothing dramatic happened. No argument, no confrontation. You just stopped showing up the same way. Fewer messages, longer reply times, less emotional availability, and suddenly, she's thinking about you more than before. Here's the part most men misunderstand. She's not chasing you. She's chasing clarity. The human brain is wired to complete patterns. When something starts and doesn't finish, an unanswered question, a broken routine, a sudden change, the brain doesn't relax. It stays alert. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect. Incomplete experiences remain active in the mind longer than completed ones. So when attention disappears without explanation, the brain fills the silence with meaning. What changed? Did I say something wrong? Is there someone else? Why do I suddenly care more? That internal dialogue is the anxiety loop. And yes, this loop can look like attraction. But psychologically, it's closer to emotional discomfort. Here's where the obsession comes from. Uncertainty triggers the same neurological pathways as threat. The brain treats missing information as something that needs to be resolved. Dopamine gets released, not because the situation feels good, but because the brain is motivated to seek answers. This is why intermittent attention is more stimulating than consistent attention. It's the same principle behind slot machines. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, but the unpredictability keeps you hooked. Now let's slow down and be very honest. If a woman becomes more emotionally reactive when ignored, it doesn't automatically mean she desires you more. It means her sense of emotional safety was interrupted, and that matters. Healthy attraction feels calm. Anxiety-driven attachment feels urgent. Men who rely on ignoring confuse urgency with desire. They think, she's texting more, so it's working. But what they don't see is what's happening internally. She's not thinking, I respect him more. She's thinking, I need to know where I stand. That's a huge difference. Now here's the controversial truth most dating advice avoids. This anxiety loop works best on women who already have unresolved emotional patterns, fear of abandonment, overthinking tendencies, or a history of inconsistent attachment. In other words, ignoring doesn't create obsession out of nowhere. It activates existing insecurity. And if you build attraction on insecurity, you inherit the consequences. Because once the uncertainty is resolved, once she gets clarity, the emotional intensity often collapses. That's why relationships built on push-pull dynamics feel intense at first and exhausting later. Here's the part men rarely examine themselves. Why does this technique feel appealing to you? Often it's because you've been on the other side of the anxiety loop before. You've felt invisible, overlooked, replaceable, and silence feels like a way to flip the power dynamic without having to say what you want. But avoidance is not confidence, and women, especially emotionally mature ones, eventually sense the difference. They may react in the short term, text more, ask questions, show concern, but long term, they don't feel safe. And safety is the foundation of sustained attraction. So yes, ignoring can trigger obsession. But obsession is not connection. It's a nervous system response to uncertainty. And if you're honest with yourself, you don't want a woman attached to you because she's anxious. You want her choosing you because she feels grounded with you. In the next section, we're going to turn the mirror back on men, calmly but directly, and talk about why this tactic only works on men who haven't learned self-respect yet. Let's slow this down because this part isn't meant to attack you, but it is meant to wake you up. If ignoring a woman feels like your strongest move, there's usually a deeper reason behind it. Not strategy, not dominance, but fear. Fear of saying what you want, fear of being seen as too much, fear of rejection if you show up honestly. So silence becomes a shield. Here's the psychological pattern that plays out for many men. You invest early, you over-explain, you try to prove value with availability, and somewhere inside, you're hoping she chooses you so you can finally relax. When that doesn't happen, or when her energy drops, panic kicks in, and instead of addressing it directly, you pull back completely. From the outside, it looks like control. From the inside, it's emotional withdrawal. This is the hard truth. Men who respect themselves don't disappear to feel powerful. They step back because they already feel whole. Ignoring only becomes a tool when you believe your presence has no value unless it's taken away. Think about that for a moment. If your attention only feels important when it's gone, then deep down, you don't believe it's valuable when it's given. That's not masculinity. That's insecurity dressed up as discipline. Psychologically, self-respect shows up as consistency, not constant availability, but emotional steadiness. You don't rush, you don't vanish. You respond when it aligns with your life, not when anxiety tells you to perform. Men who lack self-respect swing between extremes. Too much attention, then none at all. And that emotional whiplash is what creates confusion, not attraction. Here's the part you may not like hearing. When ignoring works, it's often because the woman is doing the emotional labor, wondering, adjusting, chasing clarity, while the man avoids responsibility for the dynamic. And eventually, that dynamic collapses. Because emotionally healthy women don't stay where communication feels like a test. They don't try to decode silence. They don't chase disappearing men. They disengage quietly. So if your dating history is full of short-term intensity and long-term distance, this might be the pattern underneath it. Now here's the advice part. Listen carefully. If you want real leverage in attraction, stop trying to control how she feels and start regulating how you show up. That means stop overgiving to earn validation, stop withdrawing to provoke emotion, stop using silence as a substitute for boundaries. Boundaries don't need drama, they don't need tactics, they need clarity. A man with self-respect doesn't ignore. He chooses where to invest, he chooses when to engage, and he chooses to walk away without resentment when the energy isn't mutual. That's the wake-up call. Because the goal isn't to make her anxious enough to chase you. The goal is to become someone who doesn't need chasing at all. And in the next section, we'll talk about when ignoring completely backfires and why it permanently kills attraction in women who actually have options. Let's talk about the part no one warns you about. Ignoring doesn't fail loudly. It fails quietly. There's no argument, no dramatic goodbye, just a slow emotional shutdown you don't notice until it's too late. Here's what most men miss. The same silence that creates tension in one woman creates clarity in another. Emotionally mature women don't interpret silence as mystery. They interpret it as information. They don't ask, how do I get him back? They ask, is this what communication with him feels like? And once that question is answered, attraction doesn't decline. It ends. Psychologically, attraction requires two things at the same time: emotional safety, emotional stimulation. Ignoring removes the first one. When a man disappears without explanation, the nervous system doesn't feel intrigued. It feels unsettled. And when unsettled becomes a pattern, the brain protects itself by detaching. This is why ignoring often works early and fails later. In early stages, there's curiosity, there's novelty, there's no emotional investment yet. But once a woman has options, and most do, she doesn't chase instability. She replaces it. And here's the brutal reality. You often don't even know it happened. She still replies politely. She's still nice. But the emotional door is closed. Men mistake politeness for interest and think ignoring is still working, while she's already mentally gone. This is where ego gets involved. Some men double down. They ignore harder. They wait longer. They try to re-trigger the anxiety loop. But emotional maturity doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to presence. Ignoring backfires most with women who are emotionally secure, have stable social lives, don't need validation to feel chosen. In early stages, there's curiosity, there's novelty, there's no emotional investment yet. But once a woman has options, and most do, she doesn't chase instability. She replaces it. And here's the brutal reality. You often don't even know it happened. She still replies politely. She's still nice. But the emotional door is closed. Men mistake politeness for interest and think ignoring is still working, while she's already mentally gone. This is where ego gets involved. Some men double down. They ignore harder. They wait longer. They try to re-trigger the anxiety loop. But emotional maturity doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to presence. Ignoring backfires most with women who are emotionally secure, have stable social lives, don't need validation to feel chosen. These women don't compete for attention. They assess behavior, and silence reads as low effort, not high value. Here's the psychological shift that kills attraction permanently. When a woman stops wondering why you're distant and starts expecting it, the mystery is gone. The uncertainty loop collapses, and with it, the emotional charge. What replaces it? Indifference. And indifference is attraction's final stage. This is why men often say, she just lost interest out of nowhere. No, she observed a pattern and adjusted. Now let's bring this back to you. If ignoring is your default response to uncertainty, ask yourself this: what kind of relationship are you training her to expect? One where communication disappears under pressure? One where emotional availability is conditional? Because people don't fall in love with potential. They fall in love with patterns, and patterns become expectations. The men who keep long-term attraction don't disappear when things feel unclear. They slow down, but they stay present. They don't chase, but they don't punish with silence either. That balance is rare, and that's why it's attractive. In the next section, we'll talk about the alternative no one markets, because it can't be packaged as a trick, and why it quietly outperforms ignoring every time. The men who keep long-term attraction don't disappear when things feel unclear. They slow down, but they stay present. They don't chase, but they don't punish with silence either. That balance is rare, and that's why it's attractive. In the next section, we'll talk about the alternative no one markets, because it can't be packaged as a trick, and why it quietly outperforms ignoring every time. The men who keep long-term attraction don't disappear when things feel unclear. They slow down, but they stay present. They don't chase, but they don't punish with silence either. That balance is rare, and that's why it's attractive. In the next section, we'll talk about the alternative no one markets, because it can't be packaged as a trick, and why it quietly outperforms ignoring every time. The men who keep long-term attraction don't disappear when things feel unclear. They slow down, but they stay present. They don't chase, but they don't punish with silence either. That balance is rare, and that's why it's attractive. In the next section, we'll talk about the alternative no one markets, because it can't be packaged as a trick, and why it quietly outperforms ignoring every time. The men who keep long-term attraction don't disappear when things feel unclear. They slow down, but they stay present. They don't chase, but they don't punish with silence either. That balance is rare, and that's why it's attractive. In the next section, we'll talk about the alternative no one markets, because it can't be packaged as a trick, and why it quietly outperforms ignoring every time. The men who keep long-term attraction don't disappear when things feel unclear. They slow down, but they stay present. They don't chase, but they don't punish with silence either. That balance is rare, and that's why it's attractive. In the next section, we'll talk about the alternative no one markets, because it can't be packaged as a trick, and why it quietly outperforms ignoring every time. Here's the truth that doesn't sell courses or go viral clips. Ignoring works fast, but presence works deep. And depth is what keeps attraction alive. The alternative to ignoring is not chasing. It's not over-texting. It's not explaining yourself endlessly. The real alternative is emotional self-control. Let's break that down simply. Emotionally grounded men don't use silence to provoke reactions. They don't need to. Their lives already have structure, purpose, and direction, so their availability naturally fluctuates, without strategy. And women feel that difference immediately. Psychologically, calm consistency signals something powerful. This man is regulated. He's not ruled by fear or urgency. That's attractive. Instead of disappearing, these men do something far more effective. They respond proportionally. If the energy is mutual, they engage fully, without hesitation. If the energy drops, they don't panic or punish. They redirect focus back to their life. If interest isn't reciprocated, they disengage cleanly, without bitterness. Notice what's missing here. No games, no tests, no silent treatments. Just clarity. And clarity is rare. Most men oscillate between overinvestment and withdrawal because they're trying to manage how the woman feels instead of managing themselves. Here's the psychological advantage of this approach. When you stay emotionally present but not dependent, you remove the anxiety loop entirely. There's nothing to chase, nothing to decode, nothing to fear losing. And paradoxically, that's what creates genuine attraction. Because attraction isn't triggered by absence, it's triggered by non-neediness. Women are highly attuned to emotional pressure. They can feel when a man's silence is loaded with expectation, but they can also feel when a man is simply busy, fulfilled, and unbothered. Same behavior, completely different signal. This is why mature attraction doesn't feel dramatic. It feels calm, steady, and intentional. And yes, it's less intoxicating than emotional chaos, but it lasts. Here's the part men need to hear clearly. If the only way you feel respected is by being missed, you're still outsourcing your self-worth. Real power is knowing your value, whether someone notices or not. When you stop trying to control attraction, you become attractive. When you stop withdrawing to feel safe, you become grounded. When you stop using silence as leverage, your presence gains weight. That's the alternative no one markets, because it requires inner work, not tactics. And now, it's time to bring this home. Let me leave you with a truth that might sting a little, but only because it's honest. If ignoring a woman is the only time you feel powerful, then the problem was never her interest. It was your relationship with yourself. I say this calmly, not critically, because what most men are really doing when they ignore isn't strategy. It's self-protection. It's avoiding vulnerability. It's hoping silence will do the emotional work that confidence should have done. Here's the controversial truth. A woman doesn't fall deeply for a man because he disappears. She disconnects from him when he does. Yes, silence can create tension. Yes, it can trigger curiosity. But long-term attraction is built on something far less dramatic and far more rare: emotional steadiness. And I want you to hear this clearly. Women don't want to chase men who are confusing. They want to choose men who are clear. If a woman leans in when you pull away, ask yourself why. Is it desire or anxiety? And do you really want to be chosen because someone is unsettled? If this video challenged you, good. That means you're paying attention. I want you to comment below and share your experience, whether ignoring worked, failed, or backfired on you. I read those comments and I do reach out. This channel isn't about tricks. It's about understanding what's really happening beneath the surface. Because when you stop playing games, you stop losing. And that's when attraction becomes simple again.